Tonight, the smearing of Israel. The media has been so quick to blame Israel for the shocking bombing of a hospital in Gaza, and worse, so by implication did Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
We condemn any indiscriminate attacks and targeting of civilian infrastructure, including hospitals.
But I'll show you powerful evidence that suggests Israel is not to blame. You have been conned. Also tonight, Israel holds off its invasion of Gaza, and there's something you're not being told. Signs that war could spread around the world if it does, thanks to a new axis of evil. We'll cross to Israel for the latest. But first, is the Prime Minister deaf? Or is he just a puppet of faceless activists waiting to give him their orders? Well, Albanese still can't accept that Australians said no to his agenda of racial division on Saturday. It wasn't even close. 61% voted no to his Aboriginal-only voice. But as I said last night, Albanese still won't promise to now scrap another key demand of the Uluru Statement that he promised to implement in full. He's refused, and again today, to also scrap the Makarrata Commission, that he wants to negotiate a treaty between Aborigines and the rest of us, including reparations. Now, that's exactly the agenda that Australians revolted against. No to dividing us by race. Yet Albanese yesterday told Parliament he cannot even think of giving up the Makarrata Commission until he'd had a chance to ask some unnamed Aboriginal activists what they thought. But sadly, the activists he's thinking of are off on their week of silence after losing the voice, a week of sulking. And Albanese says he'll have to wait until then before telling us what he'll do. Now, the opposition leader today asked the obvious question and didn't get a straight answer.
Is it the Prime Minister's position that he doesn't know if he personally supports Makarrata Treaty and truth-telling until he speaks with the referendum working group?
Now, if those opposite think that we should not listen to Indigenous Australians about matters that affect them at all, then they should say so.
I am stunned. These Aboriginal activists seem to be the same ones who ordered Albanese not to compromise on their radical voice, and see how that worked out. Now he's waiting for these same activists to give him his next orders on the Makarrata. I mean, wake up. You're the Prime Minister. You're not someone's puppet. You give orders and you don't take them, and certainly not from an unelected bunch of sooking radicals whose names are kept secret from the rest of us. This is not leadership. You know, these people even have Albanese parroting their deceitful propaganda about the Makarrata, like, hey, there's nothing to fear, as Albanese told Parliament yesterday.
Makarrata is simply a Yolngu word for coming together after struggle. I think it's a good thing that people come together.
That's actually a bit of bull, because the principal of Arnhem Land's Yirrkala school, that's in Yolngu territory, has told the ABC that in fact Makarrata literally means a spear penetrating, usually the thigh of a person that's done wrong, so they cannot hunt anymore, they cannot walk properly, they cannot run properly, to maim them, to settle them down. And that actually seems the true agenda of Albanese's Makarrata, doesn't it? It's to maim our pride in our past and our present, and to punish non-Aborigines for the alleged sins of their race, so they can't walk properly either. And it's all about politics, power politics. You know, where's the talk from Labor about doing something now about the poverty and unemployment and violence in too many Aboriginal communities? But you look what happened when the National Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, late yesterday, tried to get the Senate to agree to a royal commission into the awful sexual abuse of Aboriginal children.
I know of a case now being dealt with where a 6-year-old girl was raped and abused by her cousin, a man 12 years older than her. For 7 years, this young girl was tortured, frightened, in need of help, with no one to turn to because too many community and family members turned a blind eye.
But can you believe it? The Greens, Labor and Independent Senator David Pocock all said no to a royal commission. The Greens complained it would just give Aborigines a bad name.
Hypocritical attempt to talk up another Royal Commission into this issue will just be another segue into the intervention type approach to demonise First Nations people in this country.
And Labor said this was just playing politics, while it meanwhile played politics itself with this, and even told a joke when they're discussing child sexual abuse.
And so we have the Leader of the Opposition, the angriest man in Australian politics, the most extreme leader of the Liberal and National parties in our history, always looking for an argument, never interested in solutions. He changed his mind more quickly and more often than Kamal.
Order.
At least Kamal's popular.
Isn't this such the story of what we've gone through for a year and a half? Labor out there wanting to do purely symbolic things that just hand jobs and power to a little bunch of the angriest activists. But when it comes to doing the hard yards of, say, tackling child abuse, that's just politics. That's just politics. It's sick. Joining me every Wednesday is National Senator Matt Canavan. Matt Canavan, thank you for joining me. The Prime Minister waiting for faceless Aboriginal activists to tell him what he thinks about a Makarrata. I mean, what an extraordinary failure of leadership.
Well, it is, Andrew. We think as a country that we are electing a Prime Minister at every election, and you'd expect that Prime Minister to be the one making decisions. But here we have a leader of the Labor Party that's harking back to previous eras. You've pointed out that it seems to be there are a bunch of faceless men and women, backroom men and women, who are going to tell our Prime Minister what to do. These people, of course, are unelected. The backroom boys and girls here are unelected here, telling the Prime Minister what to do. And whatever they do tell the Prime Minister, he now has no mandate to proceed with a treaty. The Australian people last weekend rejected the policies that the Prime Minister took to the election around the voice, and the treaty was always part of that. He always mentioned it together. He used to emblazon it on T-shirts before he got embarrassed. And he now has no mandate for that agenda. And I would suggest that if the Prime Minister wants to conclude a treaty with Indigenous Australians, however he imagines that would happen, he has to take that to the next election. He has to go back to the Australian people, which is only now 18 months or so away, take it back to the Australian people and seek another mandate for that, because he has none after this shocking defeat at the referendum this weekend.
Well, I think what he forgets, thinking, well, look, it's up to a bunch of unelected activists, Aboriginal activists, to tell me what to think. A treaty involves 100% of Australians. It's between two supposedly rival races or groups of races clashing and one paying the other. It's not for one tiny group of activists to determine the shape of it and what he should think. But, you said, the past. It's quite true. 60 years ago it is now. The famous front page picture that destroyed Labor back then. The Labor leader, Arthur Calwell, Deputy Gough Whitlam, waiting out in the street while inside the Labor Federal Conference was deciding what to tell them to say about, in this case, defence. Here we go. Unelected people that I think sold him up the river in the first place by telling him to proceed with a very radical voice that advisers were warning would not pass muster.
And we have no idea, of course, who's in that room. We're not told it. Who knows? You've obviously got the activist groups that you've mentioned, but Alan Joyce might be there, the big corporations, the big banks. They might all be in these rooms telling the Prime Minister what to do. We have no idea what about that. And you've raised a good point there about any treaty obviously involves at least two parties. I would suggest too, of course, you've got hundreds of potential Indigenous tribes as well that have their own views on these issues, and I think it's not right to treat them homogenous. I know, speaking to Aboriginal people, that they all have very different views, and I'm sure would have very different views about any proposed treaty. And of course, that other party is the Australian people, and that's why I say that any proposal for a treaty needs to go back to the Australian people at the next election. This time, it would be good for the Prime Minister to actually provide the detail to the Australian people before he wanted to do any treaty. And yeah, let's make the next election, if the Prime Minister wants, can be a referendum on his proposed treaty. Let him do that if he's confident enough, if he's got the guts to do this. Let the Australian people have their say on this issue.
Well, you had a whack at Alan Joyce, who famously, as the boss of Qantas at the time, promoted and sold and backed the Voice. Where are all those other businesses now? You know, the ones who donated $2 million of their shareholders' money without asking the shareholders, you know, like Wesfarmers and BHP and Rio, Telstra, $1 million. Where are they all now? Saying sorry, or, you know, sorry to the shareholders for a start? Because I would have thought that with a vote this big against the Voice, a lot of shareholders won't be happy their money went to funding only one side of this debate.
Look, they do seem to be copping it at AGMs, and don't they deserve to do that? They probably won't get any kind of reduction in their remuneration or what have you. But, you know, I would hope, and maybe I'm hoping against hope, but all of these big corporations wanted to back this Voice, this what would have been a voice here from Canberra, largely reflecting their principles and values. Isn't it about time that our big businesses, our big organisations in this country try and listen? So the Voice is over now. Isn't it about time they actually listen to people? And, you know, I would encourage them to get out and about, have your AGMs outside just the capital cities, talk to people, because there's a real growing divide that is being widened here, because people see that decisions on the ground in their community are being taken out of their hands. It's not just the big corporations. You've got activist shareholders like BlackRock and Vanguard, big superannuation funds, who are making decisions about the industries, the resource policies, the energy policies that impact their real lives in their communities, and they've got no say on it, no voice. And this last weekend they did get a vote, and boy did they send a message to our big corporations. So let's hope they can listen to that, because it's only if they do listen to that we'll be able to put our country together again and bridge this growing gap.
Well, I'd like to see some of those executives take a pay haircut to punish them for misspending shareholders' money without permission on a campaign that, like I say, this vote suggests most of those shareholders would have objected to. Matt Canavan, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Let's now expose the giant hoax today, a hugely dangerous one. Now, the ABC, what do you expect? It's got a shameful history of believing the worst of Israel, but I did expect better of the Prime Minister when he reacted to this ghastly bombing early this morning of a hospital in Gaza. Now, twice today, the Prime Minister suggested, without proof, without evidence, that Israel did this, and was even targeting a crowded hospital, causing hundreds of dead.
We condemn any indiscriminate attacks and targeting of civilian infrastructure, including hospitals.
There's no surprise, of course, that the world's media immediately repeated the spin of the Hamas terrorist group that actually runs Gaza, that it was the Jews that did this. And so did our ABC. It tweeted, Israeli airstrikers killed hundreds of Palestinians at a Gaza hospital crammed with patients and displaced people, health authorities in the besieged enclave say. Does it ever occur to ABC journalists or any other journalists talking to authorities in Gaza that these people might lie? They don't dare tell the truth in an area that's run by terrorists who kill their enemies, who even burn babies alive, as we saw last week. But how sad to see Prime Minister Albanese also imply, I hope accidentally, that Israel was targeting hospitals, because this is feeding the anti-Jewish mob that's already running riot. Now, for a start, why even assume that Israel did it? Bombing hospitals is not in its interest. For one, it would destroy support in the West. And now the evidence is very strong that it is innocent, and this bombing was caused instead by an Islamic terrorist group which fired a rocket at Israel that malfunctioned and hit the hospital in front of it. Now, I've seen two independent videos, one from a live broadcast by Al Jazeera, showing a rocket fired from Gaza, rise in the dark before there's a flash as if there's a malfunction, and seconds later there's an explosion at the hospital below, probably made worse by the fuel it was still carrying. Now, Geo Confirmed, that's an independent internet site that fact-checks videos, said these videos backed Israel's claim that it wasn't to blame. Geoconfirm says, conclusion, a missile launched by a Palestinian group exploded mid-air, reason unknown, and one piece fell on the hospital, causing the explosion. The geolocation and timing of this footage is conclusive. Well, an hour or so ago, Israel's Defence Forces gave more powerful evidence. It was, in fact, a rocket fired by another terrorist group in Gaza, not Hamas, but the Islamic Jihad.
That there was no direct hit to the hospital itself. The only location damage is outside the hospital, in the parking lot, where we can see signs of burning, no cratering, and no structural damage to nearby buildings.
Yes, we'll look at that car park. No big crater that you would expect from an Israeli bomb. And then there was this intercepted call released by the IDF between two Hamas operatives talking at the time about what had just happened and blaming the Islamic Jihad.
بقول لك أول مرة بنشوف الصاروخ زي هيك والشظايا هذه فبقول لك تبع الجهاد الصواريخ الجهاد الإسلامي هاي. إيه؟ فهم بيقولوا تعاون الجهاد الإسلامي. إنه من عندنا هذا؟ شكله من عندنا مين اللي بيقول هيك؟ بيحكوا إنه الشظايا تبعت الصاروخ إنه الشظايا محلية مش زي شظايا إيش بتقول؟ سبحان الله من عندنا ما لقاش غيرين بجرسلي. عاد هذول تلاقيهم من المقبرة الورا دي بثلاث محط فيهم. ايش اصدر؟ بتلاقيهم طالعين من المقبرة الورا المستشفى المعمداني دي.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Joining me from Israel is Major Doron Spielman, a spokesman for Israel's Defence Forces. Major, thank you so much for your time. That audio that we just heard of intercepts from Hamas operatives admitting it was an Islamic Jihad rocket that hit the hospital, not an Israeli missile or bomb. Can you tell us anything about who these people are and how you obtained that audio?
So first of all, we have, as that audio shows, Hamas terrorists which are fully aware, immediately aware, that this is an Islamic Jihad misfired rocket. It was fired from a cemetery directly behind the hospital, landed on the parking lot of the hospital, not on the hospital itself. And assuming if we would accept Hamas's reports, killed a number of civilians. And as we can see, this is not surprising. Hamas immediately after this reported to the world a lie that this was Israel. And this is just one more example where Hamas, who doesn't care about murdering, doesn't think twice about murdering small children and destroying families, doesn't care. They have no qualms about lying to the world. And that's what this audio receives. We also have video, and this was received by our intelligence forces.
Just to let our viewers know that we're having trouble getting a good picture of you through the internet connection, so that's why we're seeing so much overlay. Major, if this is a jihadist missile that just hit that car park, where did all those victims come from that we've been seeing on TV?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure. Again, the loss of any civilian life is a tragedy. I don't want to see Gazan civilians killed. I certainly don't want to see Israeli civilians killed, which Hamas benefits from either of them being killed. But I would assume we're going to have to really verify this story. Hamas immediately said it was 500 civilians who were killed in this, and we can't really believe anything they say. It's very difficult. And the problem is, as you had mentioned, many media outlets, not you, but many other media outlets immediately went out to the public with Hamas, a terror organization that resembles ISIS, with their report of the incident. Where we on the Israeli side, we looked at our intelligence footage, we spoke to the highest level officers before we verified it in 10 different checks that this was not us. So that's the imbalance of this game. This is the double standard that's taking place here right now.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? How do you explain how so many journalists there, some in Gaza, but most in Israel, are so quick to believe that Israel did it before any evidence is in?
Well, you know, this is really something that's part of Hamas's cycle of terror. We've seen it many times. And like you had said so eloquently, many of the press fall into it. Essentially, Hamas launches an attack with rockets, massacre civilians. They then, the second stage is they run back into Gaza, barricade themselves deeper, and tell the families to go to sleep upstairs, directly in, of course, any target right away. Then, if civilians are killed, God forbid, Hamas waves a flag and says that there's a humanitarian crisis as a result of Israel. The international community tells Israel to stop. Hamas rebuilds and carries out another massacre. This is this ongoing Hamas cycle of violence, which really is based upon deceiving the international community. How they get away with this is really difficult for us to understand. We're hoping that other journalists who do accurate reporting like yourself will help and aid and find the truth and stop this cycle from happening.
Hamas has got it all in its favour. If Israelis die, they win, and if Palestinians die, they still win. But the damage is done. I mean, you get your side of the story out, but a lot of people in Muslim countries will not be allowed to hear it. So, unfortunately, there it is, the whirlwind. Your aim in this operation now, which is still stalled, you still haven't done a land invasion, but you have done bombings and things like that. Your aim is to destroy Hamas. What damage so far have you done?
So we've been carrying out a number of airstrikes at specific military targets. Just last night, we neutralized 2 more top Hamas commanders from that same force that were involved in the massacre in Israel, one of their top intelligence commanders and their commander of central Gaza. So we've taken out a number of their kind of mobster heads of this terror regime. We've also hit much of their infrastructure, their arms piles, their silos. They have aerial defense systems that they've hidden, to great surprise, inside water heaters, on top of buildings and satellites. So we've managed satellite dishes. We've managed to strike a lot of this infrastructure. However, as you mentioned, they're still forcing their civilians to stay there. We've called on all their civilians for days now to move out of the way, and hundreds of thousands have moved. But Hamas has no qualms about killing their own civilians. And we know they're holding them there. We have evidence at gunpoint trying to keep them in our way. But in any case, we know they started this war. We're going to finish this war by destroying Hamas. We will get there. It might take some time, but we will achieve that goal.
Now, Major Doran Spielman, maybe I watched too much James Bond, too many episodes of Fauda, but I always wonder, you've got the Hamas leadership sitting there in Qatar. They're way out, safely out of harm's way. They're just sitting there in their offices, giving little press conferences or whatever. Is it really that impossible to assassinate them?
Well, first of all, I think you make a very important point. IDF colonels, commanders, a number of them have been killed. Military leaders, certainly they're all in Israel. And second of all, many of them were in the field, and even a number of them have been killed. There's a sense of honor and pride in Israel that our commanders are with us in the field, where we see with Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah to the north that their leadership are safely watching TV in some foreign terrorist country. We see it again and again while their people are dying on the streets. And that is truly another tragedy, another kind of, I would say, evidence of their cowardice in sending their people off to, be slaughtered. We have said very clearly, anyone that was involved in this massacre, we will not forget where they are. They will have to look over their shoulder for the rest of their lives. And we will do anything that we need to do in order to make sure that at some point they are neutralized in the future and Hamas is completely disabled. That goes for wherever they are and at any time.
Yeah, except, of course, you don't really want to set Qatar on the wrong course here when they're an intermediary with the hostages, but I get that, but still. Just finally, Major Spielman, we're told that Israel, I want to knock off another myth here, we're told that Israel is starving people in Gaza with the blockade. But then today I'm seeing pictures of trucks and trucks and trucks of food at the Rafah gate, which is on the Egyptian border with Gaza. There's a gate there into Gaza. Is Israel stopping them from going in?
No, we are doing everything we can to get humanitarian aid supplies to the civilians of Gaza. We've given them days of notice. We've encouraged them to leave the area of fighting. That is according to international law, what you're supposed to do. What is affecting the welfare in Gaza more than anything else is the fact that Hamas are forcing so many of them to stay within a war zone where they don't have access. First of all, their lives are in danger. Second of all, they don't have access to critical supplies. And the international community, those reports need to be focusing on the fact that the biggest humanitarian disaster in Gaza is Hamas. They're the ones that have repeated humanitarian disasters year after year. They take supplies that are given them for humanitarian aid. And I witnessed yesterday how a number of them were made into RPGs and into grenade launching canisters, simple materials that were given to them for building hospitals. Hamas is the humanitarian problem, and that's what has to be stopped in Gaza.
Major Doron Spielman, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Now, this war over Israel is actually putting the world on the edge of a much wider war, and I'd wonder why you haven't been told. I'll show you how that is after this. I think it's suddenly dawning on Israel that this war with Hamas is part of something much bigger, a trap that could set the world in flames, and I don't think you're being told that clearly enough. Israel last week mobilised 300,000 reservists for a land invasion of Gaza to wipe out the Hamas terrorist group that rules there, an attack that keeps getting delayed. First Saturday, then Sunday, now Wednesday. And you might have noticed US President Joe Biden rushed to Israel today, landed a few minutes ago, despite the danger that it puts him in. We're told it's there to show support. He's already sent warships to the coast as well. So there's something that's clearly alarming these people gathering from the delay. And I just don't mean the obvious, that the very least, of course, Israel would be wondering how it can invade without having the 199 Jewish hostages in Gaza killed. How can it invade without killing so many civilians? And Hamas, by the way, has had years to prepare kill zones for the Israelis. But there's more. Russian President Vladimir Putin, he this week, meanwhile, flew to China to see his big ally, China's dictator, on a prearranged visit to talk about expanding their influence. And both have taken a hard line against Israel here and for the Palestinians. And you see, this war with Israel actually suits China. It suits Russia. It drags in the US to another conflict and takes the heat off Russia over its invasion in Ukraine. China, well, China, it's using this to get even more support from Muslim countries. And it likes the US being distracted by yet another war, Ukraine, and now this, just when China's considering a third one, an invasion of Taiwan. Because the fact is, there is now in the world a new axis of evil, an alliance of tyrannies: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Iran and North Korea, all anti-democratic, they're supplying Russia with weapons for its invasion of Ukraine. China is giving Russia diplomatic help. China's dictator even gave a big reception to Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas now. And there are also reports, of course, that Russia may have trained Hamas in its drone attacks on Israel. And now Iran is threatening to attack Israel by the terrorist groups it pays, like Hezbollah.
چنانچه این جنایت ادامه پیدا کنه مسلمان ها بیتاب میشن، نیروهای مقاومت بیتاب میشن، کسی جلو اینا رو دیگه نمیتونه بگیره.
And I don't think our leaders have explained clearly enough we are on the brink of a world war. Maybe they don't dare. I say the world right now looks more dangerous than since World War II. And if this invasion of Gaza goes bad, how do you think the vast number of Muslims now in the West are going to react? Joining me from New York is our regular commentator, filmmaker, Ami Horowitz. Ami Horowitz, thanks for your time. You're off to Israel next week to do your thing. You're Jewish. I don't think many people realise, well, this is how I see it. As with Nazi Germany, first come the attacks on the Jews, and when they're defeated, then come the attacks, the wider attack on Western civilization. That's how I see it. If we abandon Israel, the West is next. How do you feel about that?
Oh, you said that brilliantly, and it's so true. Israel is really the canary in the coal mine, right? They have no intention of stopping in Israel because Israel really isn't the issue. The land of Israel is not the issue. The issue is these Islamic radicals, right? I'm obviously referring to the radicals, believe that the life that we lead is a life that needs to be eliminated. And Israel happens to be the closest port for them, right? It happens to sit in a place where a lot of these Islamic radicals reside. And therefore, they are in the strike zone. But the attacks that we've seen throughout Europe and the United States over the years, 9/11, these are all connected attacks. They are not separate attacks. Like when people, it's so interesting. When I interview people who hate Israel, I always ask, how do you feel about America? And the answers are always the same. I have yet to come across a hater of Israel who doesn't equally, if not more ferociously, hate the United States. You have to understand that ultimately, there's a reason why Iran always says Israel is the small Satan, the U.S. is the large Satan. And by the way, the U.S. is just a proxy for the West in general. That when they say the U.S., they mean the West. But they say the U.S. because the U.S. is the most powerful entity in the West. So make no mistake about it. The hatred of Israel is intertwined inexorably with the hatred of the United States and the hatred of the West in general.
Yeah, look, I've just been reading a great essay from one of the greatest journalists I know, Joseph Roth, Jewish, German, fled Germany in 1933 when Hitler took over, and he wrote that year, so prescient. He said, we Jews, we stood in the front row of the defenders of Europe, and we were the first to be defeated. That, I think, is what is at stake right here, all over again, history repeating itself. But then when you see these protests, Army, against Israel and brackets against Jews in so many capital cities in the West over the last week or so, what does that tell you?
It's just disgusting. I don't know how else to say this. And I went to these protests in the past. I went to the protests we had this past week. And if you listen to the words that they say, it's so funny. I went to the Columbia protest, right? Columbia University had a major protest. I was able to get in. And there was, of course, a counter protest, a pro-Israel protest. If you listen to the words being said at the pro-Hamas rally by these students, you hear the vitriol of violence. You hear their hatred of everything we just spoke about. And then if you look over, just walk over 30, 40 feet to the Israeli the Jewish counter protest, Israeli counter protest, all you hear are songs of peace and love. Literally, the speeches gave no indication of hate, even though Israel and the Jews faced the worst atrocities one can imagine just a few days before. But you didn't hear words of hate and disgust and violence. You heard words and singing of peace. But when you went to the pro-Palestinian camp, all you heard were words of violence. And by the way, the chant they kept saying over and over, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean, Andrew? Let's break that down. From the river Jordan to the sea, the Mediterranean. Guess what's in between those two things, Andrew? The state of Israel. They have no interest in having just the West Bank and Gaza as their homeland, as they purport to. No, this is a genocidal chant that you've heard for years, from the river to the sea. They want to, this has never changed from the moment there was a partition of Israel, when the British said, we're going to partition this thing in half. We're going to give half to the Jews where the Jews live and have lived for thousands of years, and the other half we're going to give to the Palestinians or to the Arabs who live there. And guess what? They didn't want that. They then started a genocidal war to push the Jews into the sea. Well, guess what? Fast forward 70 years, Andrew, and nothing has changed. They are still chanting those same words.
Look, I'm afraid that is the case as I see it. Let's just switch quickly to what's actually going on now. Joe Biden flying to Israel. That's a big call, US president in a kind of war zone. Good on him. But what do you think that's about? Because I find it interesting that the land war on Gaza has not started, despite being, us being told it could start last weekend.
Yeah, look, as you know, I have criticized Joe Biden very vocally on your show and other platforms. Not a fan of the man as president of the United States. Having said that, it actually gives me great pleasure to say that Joe Biden has been through this a steadfast supporter of the state of Israel. No qualifications. He has said all the right things. The fact that he's coming to Israel at a time during war, you do not see presidents do that. They do not fly into war zones. This is him showing his steadfast friendship and support for the state of Israel. I appreciate that. I'm sure all Israelis appreciate that. I think it's a wonderful thing. Look, there have been calls from his left, very vociferous calls for him to back off and to tell Israel to back off. And you've heard horrible things coming from the hard left, terrible lies coming from his own members of his own party. And he has thus far withstood that pressure, has said all the right things, and I am very glad for Joe Biden what he's done for Israel.
Yes, I give him a huge tick, Amy Horowitz, thank you so much indeed for your time, and keep safe on your trip next week.
Thank you, Andrew.
The vote on The Voice has just made this man the most useless minister in the government. I'll tell you why after the break. Plus, Greens leader Adam Bandt outdoes himself by thinking a terrorist would have told him the truth. The panel after this. We've now got President Biden meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and we're going straight there.
And parents in front of their children. They burnt people alive. They raped and murdered women. They beheaded soldiers. They searched for the secret hiding places where parents hid their children. And just imagine, Mr. President, the fear and the panic of those little children in their last moments as the monsters found out their hiding places. Hamas kidnapped women, children, elderly, Holocaust survivors. I know you share our outrage on this, and I know you share our determination to bring these people back. On October 7th, Hamas murdered 1,400 Israelis, maybe more. This is in a country of fewer than 10 million people. This would be equivalent to over 50,000 Americans murdered in a single day. That's 29 11s. That is why October 7th is another day that will live in infamy. October 7th, Hamas murdered 1,400 Israelis, maybe more. This is in a country of fewer than 10 million people. This would be equivalent to over 50,000 Americans murdered in a single day. That's 29 11s. That is why October 7th is another day that will live in infamy. Mr. President, you rightly said that Hamas is worse than ISIS. The German Chancellor, who visited here yesterday, said that Hamas were the new Nazis. You're both right. And just as the civilized world united to defeat the Nazis and united to defeat ISIS, the civilized world must unite to defeat Hamas. I can assure you, Mr. President, Israel is united to defeat Hamas, and we will defeat Hamas and remove this terrible threat from our lives. The forces of civilization will prevail for our sake, for your sake, for peace and security in our region and in the world. Mr. President, for the people of Israel, there's only one thing better than having a true friend like you standing with Israel, and that is having you standing in Israel. Your visit here is the first visit of an American president in Israel at a time of war. It is deeply, deeply moving. It speaks to the depth of your personal commitment to Israel. It speaks to the depth of your personal commitment to the future of the Jewish people and the one and only Jewish state. So I know I speak for all the people of Israel when I say, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for standing with Israel today, tomorrow, and always.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. Look, folks, I wanted to be here today for a simple reason. I wanted the people of Israel, the people of the world, to know where the United States stands. I've had my great Secretary of State here. He's been here for a lot. But I wanted to personally come and make that clear. Terrorist group Hamas has slaughtered, as has been pointed out, over 1,300 people. And it's not hyperbole to suggest slaughtered. And including 31 Americans as part of that. And they've taken scores of people hostage, including children. You said, imagine what those children hiding from Hamas were thinking. It's beyond my comprehension to be able to imagine what they're thinking. Beyond my comprehension. They're committed evils that and atrocities that make ISIS look somewhat more rational. You know, Americans are grieving with you. They really are. And Americans are worried. Americans are worried because we know this is not an easy field to navigate, what you have to do. But the fact is that Israel, as they respond to these attacks, it seems to me that have to continue to ensure that you have what you need to defend yourselves. And we're going to make sure that occurs, as you know. And we have to also bear in mind that Hamas does not represent all the Palestinian people. And it has brought them only suffering. You know, years ago, I asked the Secretary of State when he and I were working in the Senate to write something for me, and he said, he wrote a line that I think is appropriate. He said, it's not, we lead, not just, well, I won't go into it, I'll wait later. Taking too much time, but the point is this, that I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there not sure. So we got to overcome a lot of things. And it also means encouraging life-saving capacity to help the Palestinians who are innocent, caught in the middle of this. And, well, at any rate, that's who we are. Not just me, but I mean, that's who the United States is. And it's just not the example of our power, it's the power of our example that's almost as important. The world's looking. Israel has a value set like the United States does, and other democracies, and they're looking to see what we're going to do. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm very happy to be back in Israel with you. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to having a thorough discussion about where everybody goes from here. But thank you, and I want to say to the people of Israel, their courage, their commitment, their bravery is stunning. It's really stunning. I'm proud to be here.
Thank you.
Thank
Well, that was an extremely significant meeting. The American president going to Israel at a time of war, as Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, said. It was the first time an American president had done that, gone to Israel when it's at war, taking significant personal risks. There'd be no person on the planet that'd be a bigger target for terrorists than him, and saying that he stood with Israel. I thought it was very important too that he broke off to say that rocket attack on that hospital was by the other team. I wish he'd chose another word than team, but by the other team, by Islamic Jihad, not by Israel. That needs to get out there, that message, because it's being used as a stick to beat Israel bloody at the moment. I think it's huge, massive. Wow. I just wish, of course, that the President could project a little more personal strength, but all credit to him to actually be flying there and taking that stand. Well, on to the panel. Joining me is former New South Wales Treasurer Michael Kostler and David Gazzard, former Senior Liberal Advisor, now Head of DPG Advisory Solutions. Michael Kostler, this is a very significant moment. I mean, I feel like, in a way, that the world is teetering towards another superpower conflict, with Russia and China moving towards the other side in this. But I still think it's great that the American president was there. What do you think?
Oh, there's no doubt. I know that he appeared to bumble some of his comments and lost track of thought, but that's not really the issue here. It's the symbolism of him actually being there, and I think he needs full credit for taking the decision to go there. And I think they obviously prearranged some commentary on the hospital bombing, and he's obviously tried to clear the air internationally to point the finger at Hamas. And I think all of that is very, very positive, and full marks for him.
Well, meanwhile, going to the home front, David, look, I have to say how shocked I was. I mean, I know there's a lot of anti-Israel bias out there, but it is particularly from the lunatic Greens. Here is Greens leader Adam Ban today, actually taking seriously the deniers of the Islamic terrorist group that Israel says, and I think has proved, managed to bomb their own hospital. Here he is.
The Israeli military has already changed their story, firstly saying that, then saying it was Islamic Jihad, and that's been denied by Islamic Jihad.
I mean, seriously, David, you've got the Greens first trying to get Parliament to say Israel's no right to defend itself, it's a war criminal, and now this. I mean, what is going on with that party? What's its strategy? Who's it trying to appeal to?
Well, it's tiny base of 10% of the extreme left, and as your previous guest pointed out, with a root cause and a hostility to the United States and its allies. And so their ideological predisposition against the US binds them to a range of forces that are hostile to the West. Here is the problem for them, though. If they continue down this path, that they're inviting themselves into a position where no major party can do preference deals with them. I mean, when the shoe has been on the other foot, they've been quick to mention that the coalition can't do preference deals with some on the right, and they are inviting the same tactic to be revisited on them, provided they continue to side with Islamic Jihad.
Yeah, but this is these guys are sick puppies, Michael. I'm sorry. I know I've never been a fan of the Greens, but what they're doing now is sick. I wonder if they really believe some of the rubbish they're going on with.
Oh, unfortunately, Andrew, I think they do. And unfortunately, I think there are people broader than the Greens. I mean, we had two Teals make a huge mistake this week in relation to this issue. And there'd be elements within the Labor Party itself, of the left, that share these views, because we saw a speech in the Senate that I thought was quite ridiculous given the circumstances. There is no moral equivalence between what is going on in terms of the attack on Israel and the usage of hostages, and I'm talking about Palestinian hostages as well as Israeli hostages, to hide a cowardly terrorist group. And if there is collateral damage, it lays at the hands of Hamas, 100%. And I think that's where Biden was important in articulating that in his way. I mean, we've got to be very clear. Hamas is a terrorist organisation. We're not talking about the Palestinians here. And the Greens keep conflating Hamas and the Palestinians. They don't understand the issue. I mean, look, these people are off the planet on a range of issues, but on this one, they've just shown how morally bankrupt they are.
They sure have. Switching to domestic politics, David Gazzard, the government seems to have been completely rocked by the result on Saturday. I mean, it was blindingly obvious what was going to happen. Maybe they could have thought it wouldn't be quite 61% against the Voice. How have they reacted, do you think, since then to an emphatic measure of where the public is on racial division?
Well, I think the caucus has made it very clear in closed meetings that were then promptly leaked to members of the media that they were, well, very flat when they met on Tuesday because they'd all, been convinced they were going to win. And maybe as it slid away, they thought there was a big undecided vote they could get over the line with. But there was a clear focus that they had to move on to things that the public actually want them to deal with, and that's cost of living. And I'm sure it's sort of starting to, dawn on them that with IR bills in the parliament at the moment, with energy bills that are going to drive up the cost of energy, this is going to be a very hard act to actually perform. So the RBA looks like it's teetering on the brink of another rate hike. They're pushing up the cost of labour, pushing up the cost of energy, and that's exactly what the public doesn't want them to do. So I think the voice has been a giant distraction in a lot of ways. It's been the personal plaything of the Prime Minister. It's cost them a lot of political capital, and now they've been brought back to earth with a thud, and they're actually authoring the cost increases that the public does not want.
It's in fact probably going to be worse, isn't it, Michael? Because this world uproar, and I know a lot of Australians might be thinking, what's it got to do with us? It does. The Reserve Bank governor today warned, she's sorry, but inflation might now stay higher for longer because of all the uncertainty now. I mean, interruptions to gas and oil supplies, things like that. She said the economy is just going to get another hit. How bad do you think it could get?
Well, look, I always expected an additional rate rise, so I'm not surprised that they're heading in that direction. I think, yes, it potentially will get worse. The real issue here is they haven't got the underlying inflation under control. And all these factors, whilst they add to the pressure of inflation, if you don't get that underlying factors right, you're in trouble. And again, Andrew, it's a topic that you've dealt with on many occasions. This immigration, push is just going to add to all of that. And, unless they take a deep breath and carve back that immigration program, I think you're going to face rate rises. There's no doubt about that. And, as for the Labor Party, I think, I hope David's right about them taking a deep breath. I think there's people in there that want to go the full hog, chase the Truth Commission and the treaty and everything else. And I can tell you, if you look at those seats, it wasn't the uneducated. I mean, this narrative that somehow the credential class is pushing, that it's only the uneducated that somehow voted for this. They're wrong. All these multicultural Labor seats, they've got a chance of losing if they push this further. Just because you've got a PhD in victim theology doesn't mean you're the smartest person in terms of politics. And unfortunately, Labor Party's got a lot of those people around them that are telling them things that they shouldn't be listening to.
I'll tell you one thing, David, is this man, Matt Thistlethwaite, now the most useless man not by his own fault, the most useless minister in this government? Because he was appointed as the Minister for the Republic, with the Labor thinking, there's going to be a referendum on the Republic after this referendum. Not going to happen now, is it?
Forget about that. That is maybe generations away, if we ever get there at all. I was saying earlier today to someone that Thistlethwaite ought to go in to see the Prime Minister and say, give me another job because this one is completely a waste of time. I'm actually surprised the opposition hasn't sort of seized on the fact that he still has this, because we've just gone through The Voice. It was another thing that the PM wanted to do around, a social measure that he was keen on. But it's blown up. I mean, you would be absolutely mad to take a referendum back on another 27th order issue for maybe the same people that Michael was talking about in inner city seats.
Exactly. It's not going to happen. Bye-bye, Matt Thistlethwaite. That's it from me. Thank you very much to Michael Costa, David Gazzard. But now it's Chris Kenny. Good night.